Mr. Tang, welcome to our program. Could you start by briefly telling us about your history and ties with the New York Times?
Sure. It's actually quite a coincidence. These days, a lot of things seem to have something to do with me. Among all Western media, my ties with the New York Times are probably the deepest. I feel obliged to tell the story. First, the very first English report about me was from the New York Times, and they started interviewing me before I even arrived in the U.S. They began in early 1992. I landed in the U.S. on April 23, 1992, and they were already interviewing me in February or March, more than once. Where? In Hong Kong. I was staying there at the time. My asylum application had been approved, and I was preparing to come to America. Back then, Human Rights Watch's representative in Hong Kong was Robin Monroe, Chinese name Luo Bin, a Brit. Many people thought he was Chinese because of the Chinese name. He spoke excellent Chinese. He was the first sinologist from a Western country to study in China after the reform and opening at Nanjing University in 1977. He was also the first to be expelled after 1989, expelled after June 4th. He wrote one of the first books about the June 4th crackdown, Black Hands of Beijing, Lives of Defiance in China's Democracy Movement. He knew Nicholas Kristof very well, a very famous New York Times reporter. His Chinese name is Ji Sidao. His wife is Cheryl Wudun. Both of them won the Pulitzer Prize for their reporting on June 4th, so they were extremely well known in the U.S. media. Very rare to win 2 Pulitzers. At that time, Kristof happened to be in Hong Kong for reasons I don't know. In the late 80s, he had been the NYT Beijing bureau chief. His wife is a Chinese American and speaks Chinese, and Kristof himself speaks very good Chinese. He's kind of a sinologist, too. He and Robin were close buddies, so Robin introduced me to him. The first Western reporter I met was Kristof. The second was Melinda Liu from Newsweek, a half-Chinese, half-Western journalist who also spoke great Chinese. We won't go into that now. So Kristof interviewed me in the lobby of the Mandarin Hotel where he was staying. Robin was there, Kristof was there, and Kristof's wife was there, 4 of us. After the interview, the piece ran under a title that, translated into Chinese, was The Three Gentlemen of Tiananmen. When I told the whole story, it was mainly around my personal experience and the book I wrote after arriving in the U.S., a kind of human rights report titled Anthems of Defeat. It was published in New York by Human Rights Watch and caused quite a stir. So many media had arranged interviews in advance. As you know, HRW has huge influence in America, the largest human rights organization, so Robin set up a lot of interviews for me, and Kristof was the first. After he interviewed me, he was very interested because the book was the first to reveal human rights conditions outside Beijing, across other provinces. In the eyes of many Westerners, it was considered an impossible task. The book mentioned over 200 political prisoners, who they were, which prisons they were in, their sentences, the torture they suffered. I myself had been detained in 6 or 7 places, really a legendary run, altogether a year and a half, 19 months. I suffered a lot. Every time you enter a new prison, you go through the so-called new intake abuse, right? I was truly tempered 1,000 times over. So when I told the story, they found it vivid and gripping, and they seized on that focus. They had heard of the 3 Tiananmen gentlemen because they were sentenced in Beijing. 1 got life, 1 got a suspended death sentence, 1 life, and 1 20 years. Very heavy. Wait, let me correct that. 1 life sentence, 1 20 years, 1 16 years. Yu Jijian, who has now passed away, got life. He was the ringleader. Another, who later suffered mental illness, Yu Dongye, got 20 years, and Liu Deqing got 18 years. The other 2 followed Yu Dongyue. They had splashed ink on Mao Zedong's portrait on Tiananmen. No need to retell that here. Why did Kristof find my account so compelling? First, it was a major event in 1989. Second, it was closely connected to me personally. After I got out of prison, I'm from Yongzhou in Hunan, formerly called Lingling Prefecture. Yu Dongyue, the ringleader, was held in our Hunan Lingling prison, the third prison. A cadre there was my middle school classmate. When he came to visit me at home after I'd been released, he told me this top secret news. One of the prisoners under me is just like you, a political prisoner from '89 named Yu Dongyue. He told me in detail what Yu was going through inside. Two feelings hit me. First, this guy is a real man, unyielding, refused reform, wouldn't bow his head, even stirred others to resist. Second, he suffered tremendous torture. For example, he went on a hunger strike over 60 days, was kept in solitary, beaten. Later, he was beaten so badly he developed mental illness. He had a gash on his head, 5 or 6 inches long. I was shocked, and I felt a deep emotional connection. After I told Christoph this, his report on my human rights book used the title, The Three Gentlemen of Tiananmen.
So people outside didn't really know these details. You were the first to reveal them.
Exactly. People only knew they were sentenced in '89. Beyond that, nothing. And the way their story was framed back then was totally upside down. Students had seized them and handed them to the police as thugs, not as protesters or leaders of the movement. The students even beat them before turning them in. When Yu Dongyue stayed at my home in America years later, he told me, sobbing, how bitter it was. He showed me a shirt he'd kept. The whole shirt was bloodstained from the beating. He didn't want to talk about it publicly. Old Tang, imagine how bitter this is. I've suffered so much injustice, and I still can't speak out even in America. If I do, it will smear the whole movement, since students were the main body. He was truly remarkable. He's passed away now. I still keep in touch with his wife, Shen. After that report came out, I naturally became friends with Nicholas Kristof. Then, after I arrived in the U.S., there was a second connection, a deeper one. After my book and that report were published, the New York Times' chief editor, well, by that time he was no longer editor-in-chief, but he was the paper's most famous columnist. His name was Abe Rosenthal. In the 1970s and 80s, in the Times' golden years, he was the legendary editor who led its revival. You can look him up. He's one of the greatest figures in the paper's history. He wrote an editorial because he sat on the editorial board, titled China's Black Book. It was basically about my book and praised it very highly. At that time, Beijing had just released its own white paper on U.S. human rights, trying to counter the American reports that criticized China's human rights abuses. China's report claimed America's human rights were just as bad, talking about black crime rates and all of that. Frankly, ridiculous. So my book, in contrast, became like China's Black Book of Human Rights. Rosenthal also met me in person. Imagine, the New York Times top editor, a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner. We became personal friends. Our relationship stayed very good. We kept in touch for years. Even later, which I couldn't go into in earlier articles, I can explain now since this whole thing actually mirrors the Times turning point, a kind of miniature of its shift. You see, originally the New York Times was strongly anti-CCP. The CCP disliked them. They were even expelled from China in 1989. After that, NYT published more reports on China's human rights abuses than any other major media outlet. For example, they wrote hundreds of pieces about Li Wangyang, the Iron Man of Hunan, and that story was also first disclosed by me. The later reports about him, both in NYT and Hong Kong, were all connected to my behind-the-scenes work. Rosenthal himself was a staunch anti-communist, one of the best known in the U.S. If he wrote China's Black Book, that says it all. And Robin Monroe, my old friend from Human Rights Watch, he was also one of the world's most prominent human rights scholars on China. He'd written many books about Chinese orphans adopted abroad, about China's black hands, several in all, 4 or 5 at least. Sometimes I'd drop by Christoph's office, Christoph was still in close contact with Robin. Meanwhile, because of my studies at Columbia University, I also worked for an organization called China Labor Bulletin. It's history now. They recently announced their dissolution. Back then, I didn't like to talk about it, but I can now. The founder, Han Dongfang, was once my best friend, even my best man at my wedding. Robin was also his close friend and later worked with him at China Labor Bulletin for about 10 years. That organization was powerful. It received more U.S. Foundation funding than almost any other China human rights group, even more than the Laogai Foundation, several $million a year with over a dozen employees. Robin was one of them. Han Dongfang, of course, worked closely with Christoph. Christoph wrote about human rights and Han about China's labor movement. People used to call Han the Polish Walesa of China. I worked under Han Dongfang as a case coordinator, handling human rights and labor cases. So naturally, I had more contact with Christoph. Now, one major turning point, from my perspective, was when Christoph secretly went to China to report on the Liaoyang aluminum alloy factory in Liaoning, a massive plant with tens of thousands of workers. There had been a huge protest there over the government's failure to honor workers' buyout compensation for their years of service. Something like 30 or 40,000 workers were involved. One of the leaders, I forget his full name, surname Li, was a member of the China Democracy Party. After 1998, people like Wang Yukai and Zhe Wanjun founded the China Democracy Party, and this Mr. Li was one of its leaders in the Northeast. You can imagine how serious that was for the CCP, a political dissident rallying tens of thousands of workers. The CCP took it very seriously. Later, they cracked down one by one and arrested Li and 3 others. 2 of them were converted by the authorities. The other 2 were tortured brutally. Li himself was among those crushed, sentenced to about 7 years, if I remember right. Eventually, the other 2 were bought off and switched sides. The movement collapsed. The government then offered what they called reasonable compensation to most workers, isolating the few radicals. Divide and conquer, that's how they do it. I knew the whole process very clearly because I was the one handling that case at China Labor Bulletin.
When was that?
Around 2002, Christoph slipped in to report, helped by Han. Christoph was also helping Han. Christoph went undercover to the Northeast for secret interviews.
Earlier, you said he'd been expelled?
He got expelled right after the '89 Tiananmen thing, June 4th. Then in the middle of all that, things loosened up a bit because most folks got unbanned eventually. But when he went back in, he kept it super low-key, snuck in quietly. After his piece got published, they ran his article, put it out there. He got banned from entering again. Next time he applied, because he writes about China, does all these China reports. He's like the go-to China expert and all that. So he kept wanting to head back to China. They'd say it like it's going home, because China's basically like the motherland for them, being sinologists and stuff. But now, he couldn't snag a visa, just like you said. He tried again, 2nd time, or hell, maybe even 3rd, and boom, visa denied again. I knew about that whole mess too. Then after a while, shit got dramatic. I suddenly spot this report he wrote, and it's kind of wishy-washy, Like he's saying nice things about the CCP for once. All right, that was the first time it hit me, probably around 2004 or so, then again, maybe even 2005. Point is, after all that time, he started changing, and then bam, he could go back to China, and get this. He even told Han Dongfang straight up, look, to get that visa so I can go, I had to shift my attitude a bit, otherwise my job's toast. Put it bluntly, if I can't write about China, I can't write a damn thing anymore. That's why so many sinologists, so many overseas Chinese get squeezed like that. They just dangle that visa over your head, choke you out with it, and boom, tons of people cave, especially us Chinese folks, right? Can't even go home, visit family. That sucks hard. Like us, we're the ones who stuck it out, held firm. That's when I started to feel something dangerous was happening. After that, I noticed his reports changing, and since he was the go-to guy on China issues at the New York Times, the whole paper's tone began to shift. I'm sure he was on the editorial board, too. Later, he became one of the star columnists of the Times. There aren't that many columnists there, and he won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. Imagine, at one point, people were even urging him to run for president. That's how famous I was. Among print journalists, not talking about TV, he was right at the top. He and his wife also co-wrote a book called Half the Sky. He wrote one chapter, she wrote the next, and so on. They didn't even coordinate. That book sold millions of copies in the US and was incredibly popular, which made him even more famous. So when he started setting the tone, I could see it clearly. The last time I met Abe Rosenthal, that must have been around 1998 or 1999. I organized an event in Chinatown, you've probably heard of it, together with Yu Jinshan, who was then the chairman of the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association, also tied to World Journal. We co-hosted a banquet called A Tribute to China's Democracy Movement. I invited Abe Rosenthal as one of the main speakers, along with the former mayor of New York and others. Until the day he died, Abe Rosenthal was firmly anti-communist. No question about that. I don't remember exactly when he passed away, died sometime in the 2000s. He was already in his 80s when he came to speak. Probably one of his last public appearances. After his death, the New York Times slowly started to shift its stance. And the full turn, I know exactly when. Christoph wrote this article. I think because one day he might see our show, I'm a bit disrespectful to him. So I'll speak gently, but when I emailed him back then, it was intense. What article? It was on Xi Jinping becoming vice president designated successor. That Congress, 17th, I think. Because he became general secretary at the 18th, so at the 17th, Xi was the anointed one for secretary. Li Keqiang for premier. Xi ranked ahead of Li Keqiang, so everyone knew. Hu Jintao was still secretary then. He wrote this piece praising Xi. The angle was interesting. I don't remember the full content, but all positive. One main point, Xi is a reformer, and 2 big ones I remember. Others I won't get into. First, he's Xi Zhongxun's son. Xi Zhongxun sympathized with Zhao Ziyang in '89. That's factual. Zhao got grabbed, and they were both southern faction, Guangdong side, leaders there. Second reason, super forced. Xi sent his daughter to Harvard, so that proves he's a reformer. I read that and got furious. I emailed him. If that's your logic, it doesn't hold. I don't care about your views. Everyone has different ones. I disagree, but your reasoning is invalid. Because Bo Xilai sent his son to Oxford, even middle school in the UK, and later to Harvard. At the time, not yet Harvard, but Oxford, same thing, right? Then Harvard, even Columbia. Bo Guagua got his master's at Harvard Kennedy School, PhD at Columbia Law. So does that prove Bo Xilai is a right-winger or reformer? Obviously not. He didn't reply to my email. Maybe he didn't see it. But I think that was my way of waking him up. Don't go too far, right? Like now with our big V's, former anti-communists overnight flipping to shill for the CCP, bashing Trump, Charlie Kirk. Same thing, some were my friends. I nudged them. You can't wake them. That's another story. I do that a lot. So after that, we slowly drifted apart. Another detail that 100% proves the New York Times was fully bought by the CCP, ironclad evidence. There's this woman, a reporter in her 70s. I won't name her. Back then I was at Democracy University, which I founded in late 2012, like 13 years ago. She often reached out. I didn't know her then. She got to me through Christoph or someone. Said I knew Chinese society super well, right? She interviewed me. She was working on a project, a killer project. Too bad. Such a shame. The project was exposing the CCP's 8 elders' princelings' overseas wealth, digging it all up. This woman was a senior NYT reporter, and from what I know, over a dozen people involved, a reporting team covering all angles. Not just one piece, it was a whole project. Why? Because she interviewed me, but another reporter did too. Another friend, Jeffrey Fiedler, Jeffrey. He was on the Congressional U.S. China Economic and Security Review Commission. That's a bipartisan strategic committee appointed by congressional leaders, high level, advising the U.S. government top tier on China issues. My friend was former president of the AFL-CIO Food and Allied Service Trades Department, super anti-communist, best friends with me, Han Dongfang's backer, actually also Wu Hongda's backer, Laogai Foundation board member, China Labor Bulletin board member. You can Google Jeffrey Fiedler, so very anti-communist, wrote tons of articles, and one of my best friends. So during that time, I was regularly going to DC to meet him, talking China stuff. One time, suddenly, he tells me excitedly, "We're doing something big." He spills, and I know it's NYT. How'd you know? Because she reached out too. Super intense, I couldn't say too much detail. Like spies, they sent people to Hong Kong undercover, collecting intel, right? Because lots of princelings cooperate in HK, digging into white gloves, shell companies, not his company, but using it to go public. HK has tons like that. They're fronts for others, like Huawei doesn't list, but funnels business to others to list, and the money ends up with them. Ren Zhengfei himself might be a white glove. Maybe his daughter Meng Wanzhou is the real boss. Some even say she is Mao's illegitimate child. CCP stuff is black as hell. They outsource business, that's the type. Hard to trace the backers, you only see the front layer. Like Jack Ma might be Zhou Yongkong's white glove. You stop at Ma, think he has all the money, or Lei Jun with Xiaomi. But who's really behind Xiaomi's wealth? Gotta go to HK to check, so they sent tons to HK. And offshore, Panama, all those, chasing offshore shells. I learned a lot of insider stuff from that. Offshore has white gloves too. What's the word? Shell within shell. Layers of companies, the money's at the end in a fake one, proxy. You gotta peel layers to find the real controller. So I saw all the materials from her, based on professional ethics. I didn't copy them. I regret it now. If I had, I could have written a book, bestseller. But it vanished forever. Copyright issues. She couldn't publish a book as NYT reporter. It was thick as a book already, and she was going to select and serialize. After about half a year, how many back and forths? One day, about a month, suddenly no contact. I sensed something off. Because by then, 2012, NYT was already sneaking toward the CCP. Then suddenly she shows up, invites me to dinner. Head down, embarrassed, says, "I'm not here to interview or show you the report. I'm here to tell you our half year of work was for nothing. The reports got killed." Like a CCTV or a People's Daily reporter's hard chase story getting one-shotted by the editor or a propaganda department. She was sad, apologized profusely. She probably done this routine apology to tons of people, so she was used to it. I was angry. I blasted the editor and the editorial board. She agreed, but couldn't say much. So after that, 100% confirmed. The timeline was 2012 or early 2013 because I left New York around June 4th, 2013. So that's the process. Maybe that's the trigger for the CCP's full investment in NYT. Maybe we can dig deeper around 2010 because later we found out, right? You probably heard NYT's majority shares, a big chunk, bought by this Mexican billionaire, the richest in Mexico, once top 3 worldwide like 10 years ago. Super powerful. He bought the NYT building and most equity, I forget, maybe 30% or more. Later I learned from channels his backer was Chinese state capital. Chinese companies funded him under his name. He couldn't use a U.S. company, so Mexican won to buy NYT. Think about it. After that, NYT's Chinese section on China reporting, definitely controlled by high-level propaganda department folks, agents, or Foreign Ministry of China. So it became a propaganda department outpost. That's it. So then stuff happened like you saw. I dug up that 2020 piece I wrote condemning them, right? Not just recent. They've been running series attacking Falun Gong, Shen. In 2020, already slamming Falun Gong hard, right? And before that too. So we can push it back to around 2012. They fully took over. And the biggest turning point, I think, was around 2008. Not just NYT, the whole Western mainstream media collapsed around then. I researched this deeply. In 2008, China hosted the Olympics, poured massive resources, manpower, money into united front work on the West, especially media, to sing praises for the CCP. Because at the time, Falun Gong, Human Rights Torch, Tibet people all boycotted the Beijing Olympics. I dug it up now. Italy's current PM Meloni, they boycotted the Olympics back then, right? Tons boycotting. Western mainstream had lots, including Amnesty, Human Rights Watch. So to flip Western media or governments, or at least tone down negatives, that was CCP national policy. Western media full turn started then. By 2012, my personal story proves it was fully bought by the CCP. After that, everyone sees it clearly. So think about my personal experience syncing with NYT's whole turn. I felt it deeply. If there's a lawsuit someday, I could testify as a witness whether the CCP bought it. The jury or judge would judge based on facts. So I think it's worth detailing for everyone to get it straight.
Coming back to your observation, by 2008 or 2012, they were brought to heel. But over the years, they still ran pieces critical of the CCP. Why, in the past year or two, this frenzy of attacking Falun Gong and Xingyun? From your perspective, what changed?
I think they just ran out of ammo. No more grain, out of money. Look at Western media broadly now, not just NYT, like CNN, right? Tons of them, PBS or whatever, tons. The pattern is, most doing the CCP's dirty work are also anti-Trump. Notice that? Like NYT Chinese section, VOA Chinese, BBC Chinese, Deutsche Welle Chinese, RFI Chinese, basically overseas branches of CCP propaganda. But not all BBC reporting, English or other languages, is that pro-CCP. Those departments aren't infiltrated that deep yet. But Chinese sections, fully penetrated. So NYT splits into two big parts. The Chinese section is like the NYT branch of China Times. I'll call it that, not New York anymore. China Times, New York branch. Stark naked. Every article on how strong China is. In U.S.-China rivalry, China wins big, U.S. loses bad. Introducing China like Old People's Daily Overseas Edition. Yeah, People's Daily had that pictorial supplement, right? Painting the great motherland, how grand. Super like Global Times. Even lefter than People's Daily, it's an extreme propaganda tool. People's Daily at least pretends to be news. Global Times? Pure tool to whitewash CCP, attack opposition, right? That's it. So NYT Chinese is that, but NYT overall is more like People's Daily. They sometimes do factual, objective reporting, or the paper couldn't survive a day, like overseas Chaobao, right? Even free, no one reads. Chaobao's like Global Times, lower than People's Daily overseas because it's United Front, not propaganda, cruder. So overseas splits like that. I think NYT still has some reports, like criticizing the Chinese government sometimes, like World Journal, lots of papers, including June 4th memorials, right? They have to write. When they stop writing June 4th, like HK now, right? You go to HK in 97, only after 2020, no more June 4th memorials. Was Hong Kong not taken by CCP after 97? Long taken. Why still memorials? Because June 4th memorial has pros and cons for them. Pros outweigh. Harshly, it's a vase. One country, two systems, 50 years, no change. Right? See, still can memorialize, but after 2019, they felt it was doomed. Might even hit central power. If HK flips, CCP might collapse. So they went all out, shattered the 50-year lie. After, no more June 4th, now in HK, draw 6-4 in the air. You're arrested, harsher than mainland. NYT's the same. I had ties to NYT and World Journal higher-ups. They say they meet regularly with the consulate. Consulate tells them, June 4th coming. Write more reports. Not less more. Like anti-Japanese war anniversary, write more. Why more? Big event. Win hearts, grab audience. From who? Real anti-CCP exposers like Epoch Times, NTD. Otherwise, if only those conscience media write June 4th, you're done. All audiences with any conscience go to Epoch. NTD. No one reads World Journal, so you write even more than them. And a bunch of clueless folks still think World Journal's objective public media and read it. That's the trick. NYT even more, facing American public who mostly anti-CCP, unlike overseas Chinese. So to snag US subscribers and readers, you gotta package yourself. Like spies in the democracy movement, you gotta shout, down with the CCP. Or no one follows. Tang Yuanjun shouts it daily, runs a demo org. He's the chair, right? So that's the situation with NYT. They're fully bought. A CCP appendage, no doubt. Like CNN, anti-Trump, pro-CCP. Those two big chunks, if a media goes all in on both, they're tied to the CCP somehow.